How many emotions do you feel in a day? Recently, I found myself wondering. This morning, I woke up insecure about my worth, but by the time I got to the shower, which is about 10 feet away from where I sleep, there'd been a subtle shift. I was cycling between regretful and angry. Later at the coffee store, some music on the speakers above my head during my walkout helped me feel determined. I was energized and ready to take on the world. If I had a square jaw, it would have been set. All day long, these emotions wash over me. Hundreds of them? Thousands of them? I've never counted, but I always seem to be feeling them.
Yes, they're seen as happening to you, right? Not something that you yourself make.
But that's not how Lisa sees it. Lisa is one of the most respected researchers in psychology right now, lead editor on an enormous tome on emotion, and her latest book, How Emotions Are Made, is an attempt to synthesize emotion research from a variety of fields: neuroscience, biology, anthropology, which makes it hard to summarize in a pithy way. But if I had to boil it down, here's how I'd do it. The way emotion works is the opposite of what you think. Emotions aren't reactions to the world. Emotions actually construct the world. I know at first it didn't make any sense to me either. So let's start this explanation where science stories usually start these days, with the 3 pounds of meat between your ears and the very difficult job it must do all day long.
The reason why we have a brain is because we have to control the systems in our body. We have a tremendous number of systems.
You mostly aren't aware of all of the systems in your body that your brain is regulating.
Systems for glucose, we have systems for salt, systems for oxygen.
But if your brain decided to take a day off, kick back, go to the beach, you would definitely notice, because you'd be dead.
Circulatory system.
So many systems, and all of them need to be managed perfectly in order for you to do anything, any single thing.
So, for example, your brain starts to change your blood pressure before you stand up because, it has to make sure that blood gets to the brain with oxygen, otherwise you'll faint.
Which brings us to the obligatory fancy science word that I spend 3 weeks trying to pronounce correctly. Interoception. Interoception?
Interoception is just your feeling of the sensations that come from the movements inside your body.
The easiest way to think about interoception is that it's the thing that senses the status of all these internal systems, monitors all the comings and goings. I think of it like an eye, but inside your body, turned so it's looking at you. In the same way that your eye takes in the world and then communicates what's going on to your brain, the interoception thingy surveys your body and then communicates what's going on with all these systems to your brain. Only it doesn't do as thorough a job as your eye, for good reason.
You don't feel these sensations in very high fidelity in the way that you see things in the world with a lot of detail, and you can hear things often with a lot of detail, but you don't feel things from the inside of your body with a lot of detail, because if you did, you would never pay attention to anything else in the world, ever.
So your internal eye keeps things super stupid simple.
So the way your brain is wired is to feel interoceptive sensations, the sensations from our bodies, as simple feelings of pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, calmness.
That is literally all your internal eye can communicate. Those 4 sensations.
Pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, calmness.
But all day long, it's sending your brain status updates, like a teenager on Snapchat, only worse.
Pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, calmness.
Feel sympathy for a moment for your brain. There it is, trapped in the dark, silent box of your skull. It's getting these updates about these important sensations in the body, but it doesn't know for certain what's causing them. That unpleasant loop in the stomach just then, was that because the body was hungry, or because the man who just sat down across the table is insanely good looking?
Arousal, calmness. How does it know what caused something when all it has are the effects of that thing? The answer is it has past experience, so it's guessing.
Whatever sensation you have in your body, the brain develops a theory. actually a whole bunch of theories, based on previous experience, and then uses them to make a prediction about what is going on.
When you have an ache in your body, it asks the question essentially, in this situation, in this context, the last time this happened, what was the cause of that ache? And that's really what concepts are. Concepts are your brain's using past experience in order to make sense of incoming sensory input.
Okay, let's pause on concepts because we need to talk about them and the role they play in how you feel. Your culture has a ton of emotional concepts. When you were little, a toddler, you learned them from your parents.
You feeling a little bit nervous about the big kids?
You went to the park and your mom and dad carefully explained to you that feeling that you had when that two-bit kid in the red sneakers shoved you off the swing, that was anger. Acquaint yourself with that emotion, they counseled. It will likely play a major role in your teens.
You're crying just because you got tagged?
Sometimes they told you not to be afraid.
You scared?
Sometimes you simply watched how they responded, the contours of sadness and the things that prompted it, the experience of joy and how it was expressed. These were likely the first emotional concepts you learned. But you went on. You learned regret. You learned determination. Then in college, you got introduced to the idea of Schadenfreude, which during your 20s, you practiced liberally.
That's correct.
And these concepts, these emotional concepts, they are the things that shape the raw sensations from your interoception thingy, those raw materials of pleasant, unpleasant, aroused, calm, into the actual emotions that you experience. And without these concepts, Lisa says, you wouldn't have any of the emotions that you think of as hardwired. Even sadness, even fear, even all the other things that you think of as fundamental and wired into you.
And it's parallel for vision, for example. If you have no concepts, you will see bright and dark. You won't see objects. We know this for a fact. There are people, for example, who have corneal damage or who have cataracts at birth, and then at some point in their adult life, they have a corneal transplant or their cataracts are removed, and we would imagine from the classical view that they would just be able to see everything, but they don't. They don't see for days and sometimes weeks and sometimes years. There are things they can't see because they don't have concepts. Their brain has no past visual experience to make meaning of the visual sensations that they receive. So
all they see is light and dark?
All they see is light and dark.
So if you put an apple in front of them, what would it look like?
They wouldn't see an apple. They wouldn't even see an object.
You're saying that emotion works the exact same way.
Yes, I'm saying that instead of having blobs of light and dark, without concepts, you will feel pleasant or unpleasant. You can feel pleasure. You can feel high arousal, being worked up. You can feel low activation, but you don't really feel anger, sadness, fear, disgust, or any of the other emotions that we think of as being given to us by nature.
What Lisa is saying is that our concepts make the world. And it is hard to overstate how much this changes our idea of what is actually going on when we walk down the street. The usual idea is that you are taking in the true world around you and reacting to it, this real thing that exists outside of you. But what she's saying is that everything around you is a blob until the concepts in your head shape it into a thing, and then you respond to the thing that you just created. The concepts themselves are the key.
Yes.
Now, if you watch the news, it's likely you've encountered a more contained version of the idea that concepts literally shape the world you see.
On the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, outrage and anger.
We've heard a lot about troubling police shootings of young black men, or George Zimmerman pulling a gun on Trayvon Martin.
It's the story that's ignited fierce passions across the nation.
And part of the way that people talk about police shootings is that sometimes police are responding not to the reality of the people in front of them, but to a stereotype in their head. Stereotypes are concepts. In this case, the concept that young black men are dangerous. Critics say it's that concept that shapes what the police see and can prompt them to pull the trigger when there is no actual need.
Family members confirm that 32-year-old Philando Castile has died.
But what Lisa is saying is that concepts like these work in all of us, all of the time. They take the blobs in front of us and shape them into what we see, and they take the blobs inside us and shape them into what we feel.
For better or for worse, experiences are constructed. And your emotional experience is not an indication of something objective about the event. That's just not true.
And here is the point of all this, according to Lisa.
That means that you have more control over your emotions than you might imagine. The horizon of control is much broader.
Because concepts are not hardwired. We can change them. Ultimately, we have control.
Yes.
And this is not just a fun science fact, a trippy nugget you heard on a podcast. That's not what this is.
Like, essentially, you're saying we have way more control over and therefore responsibility for our emotions.
Yes.
Control and responsibility for our emotions. It's such a puzzle. Control is fun. Who doesn't like control? But responsibility? Much less fun. Much, much less fun.
So if I have post-traumatic stress disorder, say, do I have control over that?
Well,
her little arm hanging out of the car. I couldn't get none of them images out of my mind.
Well, yes.
Tommy Jarrett, the trucker, was traumatized. And if you look at it the court's way, Tommy's emotions start with Michael Jones, Amanda's husband, who lost control of his car. But if you look at it Lisa's way, they start much earlier, with the concepts in Tommy's head. In the culture where Tommy grew up, a farm in Alabama in the 1960s,
a man should be strong enough to protect people.
A man should be in control of his truck and of himself. And if something goes wrong, it's his fault. That was the underlying concept that caused Tommy to think he was a killer. So did the PTSD come from Michael Jones, or did it come from inside Tommy? Even bringing up a question like this, it feels like a radical thing to do, because we all like to assume that if we feel something, it tells us something true about the world, something that happened to me. But Lisa isn't saying that PTSD or trauma of any kind isn't real, or that people suffering shouldn't be recognized and relieved, or that we shouldn't address the individuals and systems that harm people. She's just saying trauma isn't cancer or diabetes, where cells in your body have gone wrong. The problem has much more to do with concepts in your head, created by and based in our culture. And those aren't inevitable. Those can be changed. Lisa identifies herself as a progressive, so she really struggled when we talked about things like PTSD. But she had to admit that yes, her theory has obvious implications for lots of things in our society, even implications she doesn't like.
I see the risk in what I'm saying, right? But science is science, and we have to, I feel like it's necessary to draw people's attention to what the science has to say. And in the proper context in society and culture, people can debate the consequences. But I think, I do think that it's very dangerous to treat things as objective when they're not.
Emotions are not objective. All kinds of emotions are not objective. Even the emotions you have in response to a death.
I did kind of wonder to myself if the feelings were appropriate for the loss or if I was kind of imagining it to be worse than it really was.
What is the appropriate level of pain in response to the death of your child? This was one of the questions Amanda felt herself asking over and over again in the months after Michaela's death. But she went on. She took care of her baby Hannah, went back to work, had another baby, Ashley, and slowly the emotions inside her shifted, and the pain became less painful. And then one day, she got a call, a very strange call.
I thought it was a joke. I was standing in my kitchen. Ashley was playing on the floor, and Hannah was kind of holding onto my leg.
The person on the phone wanted Amanda to know that her family was being sued for the death of her daughter.
By the driver for his emotional distress and his pain and suffering. And I can remember thinking, you know, he doesn't know what pain and suffering is.
As the person talked, Amanda struggled to make sense of what she was hearing. Tommy, who had never met Michaela, couldn't go back to work for 9 months. But Amanda, Michaela's mother, went back after 6 weeks. How could that be?
You know, I thought, well, how can I be getting over this, but yet he still has all of this emotional distress?
After the person hung up, Amanda stumbled into the living room, sank down into a chair.
And I kind of put my head in my hands and I just shook my head, and I can remember thinking, this is unbelievable. I mean, this is, you know, after everything we've been through, you know, and now we get to deal with this.
Amanda says sitting there, she was suddenly overcome by fear.
What if we lose our house? What if we have to file bankruptcy? You know, all of this stuff, this overwhelming fear of, you know, not being able to cope.
But mostly, she thought about Tommy, and it enraged her.
He didn't have any right to feel that way.
So, Tommy. How do we think about Tommy, his pain, and the lawsuit? Lisa wants us to acknowledge that Tommy's pain, it wasn't an automatic, inevitable response. It came from the concepts in his head. So does that mean he didn't deserve to win his case? Well, Lisa is just asking us to be more honest. We can say, yes, it partly came from in his own head, but we as a society still think it's fair and just that he be compensated.
The point is that we can acknowledge the perceptions are constructed, or we can ignore it and just keep doing what we're doing anyways. I think it would be much fairer if we just acknowledged how our brains actually work.
Our brains rely on concepts, and concepts make our world, our culture, our systems, which is why it's useful to know which concepts are shaping us and which ones we're passing on to each other and to our children.
Well, today's news is shocking and reaction is quickly.
What? I can't breathe! April Fool! But you really feel that way? No!
For those of us climbing the top of the food chain, there can be no mercy.
From England tonight, a video that touched millions of people around the world today, including us.
She's like, you're the color of poop. That's memory number one.
Run, sissy, run!
And you know what? If we make these concepts, we can unmake them. But even if we don't choose to do that, even if we decide to build the world just exactly as we've built it, down to the very last brick, there in the back of our heads, when we experience something that disturbs us, can hover a liberating thought. This feeling I have, it doesn't have to be this way. There is nothing inevitable about the world that is.
You have more control over your own experience. You become more the architect of your own experience.
And that's exactly what Tommy did. We met up with him 10 years after the lawsuit. He ended up getting a $50,000 settlement. Half went to the lawyers, and in the end, Amanda's insurance company covered it. These days, Tommy's feeling much better. His life is great now. He says so himself. About a year after the accident, he started driving again. Now he has his own trucking company and a motorcycle which he and his wife ride out west when they can. About the whole awful period after the accident, he understands one thing for sure now.
My emotions wasn't being true to me. I had every right to be upset and be hurt and distraught. I didn't need to keep telling myself that I was a killer.
That emotion that the court had validated, it felt real, but it wasn't telling him anything real about the world. Tommy realized that, basically because he did exactly what Lisa Feldman Barrett says people should do when they feel like a powerful emotion is controlling them. He took this construct, which had been in his head since he was a kid, that as a good man and a ninja of a driver, he should have been able to prevent the accident.
A man should be strong enough to protect people.
And he learned a new construct. It took him a long time, more than a year, and a lot of work. And he had help from his family and from a therapist. Because changing the concepts we've grown up with and absorbed all of our lives is not easy at all. But eventually, Tommy did it. He replaced his old concept with a new one that led him to the actual truth. He was not a killer, because when that car skidded across the median, there was nothing he could have done. The new concept? Sometimes a man is not, in fact, in control.
Yeah.
Amanda has healed a lot, too, since the accident. She and Michael got a divorce, but she's remarried now and works as a nurse. She has a beautiful home where birds sing loudly in the morning. But it's not so easy to wrap up her story because it's not possible to wrap up the bones of a dead child neatly. So instead of trying, we thought we would spend a moment thinking about the person who hovers over this story and powers so many of the emotions in it. The person who didn't get to fully be.
Oh, she was a sweetie. Her face was just very much full of expression.
During our interview, we spent a lot of time talking with Amanda about Michaela, and here are the words that Amanda said to us. Michaela loved questions.
She was always asking, why is that? Why is that?
Michaela had a lisp and an easy way with love. She was good at talking about her feelings and always said the word that as dat with a D. She was buried in a yellow and purple princess costume.
In her princess outfit?
Yes, because that was her favorite.
These are the words that Amanda used. But even at the time, none seemed to fully capture the feelings Amanda has about her child and her child's death. Those feelings were larger than the concepts could contain. They floated in and around her, a great indistinct mass of pleasant and painful sensations.
That's it for today's episode.
Make sure to listen to part 2 of our emotions show. You'll hear the rest of Renato's story about discovering an emotion in the Philippines. And stay tuned for the rest of our concept album. We are taking this new way of looking at the world and testing it, not just with emotions, but with other big, big things like reality and race and the self.
Invisibilia is hosted by me, Hannah Rosen.
And me, Elise Spiegel. Our senior editor is Ann Gudenkauf. Our executive producer is Jeff Rogers. The Invisibilia ninjas are Megan Kane, Yowei Shaw, Abby Wendell, and Liana Simons.
Our technical director is Andy Huther. We had help from Micaela Rodriguez, John Hamilton, Mark Mehmet, Micah Ratner, Nancy Shute, Meredith Rizzo, Maya Dugmasova, Hillary McClellan, Chris Benderev, Nurit Eisenman, Caroline Kobsansky, Maria Paz Gutierrez, and our Vice President of Programming, Anya Grunman.
Special thanks to Jody Madeira, Walker Irving, Alice Guilford, and to the Broken Assembly for letting us use their song Emotional to close out the show, and to John Luke Heffernan for letting us use his song Upbeat.
For more information about these artists and to see the amazing original art for this episode and the entire season by the fabulous Marina Moon, go to npr.org/Invisibilia. And now for a moment of non-zen.
Like every time you say something that annoys me, I'll just be like, you're a construct.
I can't even hear you.
I can't even hear you.
Construct.
Join us next time for more Invisibilia.